All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the weekly webinar. Happy June, a new month, and new opportunities for learning and sharing and being in community with each other. I'll remind you, it looks like everybody is muted. So thank you for doing that so that we can hear our speaker well. And you can use the closed captioning feature at the bottom of your screen if you need that. We are recording. And so this presentation will be available later this afternoon for anyone to watch again, or if you want to let someone else know that it's available. And you'll get the link, of course, to it in Monday's issue of the My Alliance newsletter. That's Monday, June 9th. You'll get it at 7 a.m. Central Time. So be on the lookout for that. I think those are all of the housekeeping announcements. And so now I will introduce our presenter for today. We have Alexis Walker, who is the Senior Clinical Research Coordinator at our fellow Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Washington University in St. Louis. And just for the occasion, just because this is such a special time, I decided to come to St. Louis. So you can see I'm sitting right under the arch with y'all today through the magic of photography. I'm actually I am in St. Louis. I'm not at the arch, but I have a picture of the arch with me. And so I don't know exactly. I'm in Florissant for the St. Louis people, so I don't know where I am relative to where WashU is, but I think I'm not far. One of these days, I'm going to come to St. Louis and actually go to WashU and see. I'm going to come, I was going to say spy on you, but I don't mean spy. I'm going to just come see what it looked like over there. Anyway, enough about that. We are very excited to have our friends from Washington University Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center with us. Besides Alexis, we have Murtis Spencer, who I believe is in my role at the ADRC, Community Engagement. And we have
That's correct.
That's correct. Good. Thank you, Murtis. And we have Andre Denny, who is also at the ADRC. Tell us what your role is.
I have two roles. I lead the outreach, recruitment, and engagement for our center, the Knight Center, and I also am a clinical person. I'm a social worker at the Memory Diagnostic Center.
So I'm saluting that because, as many of our watchers know, I am also a social worker, and I'm very biased toward having social workers be presenters on the weekly webinar. And this time I got a bonus social worker, so yay. Thank you. I'm glad you told me that. Keep that in mind for the future. Welcome all of you from St. Louis. Thank you so much. A lot of our My Alliance for Brain Health community, I believe, live in St. Louis or proximate to St. Louis. And I get a lot of razzing from my Missouri friends about, remembering that we serve not just Kansas. So whenever I can find a Missouri person to come and speak, I'm always happy to do that. And if you live somewhere that's not Kansas or Missouri and you know of a good speaker, they are welcome too. So without further ado, Alexis is going to put some slides up on our screen, and tell us about the ARCHES study. I'm very excited to hear about that. You all can use the chat while Alexis presents, and then she will be able to answer questions and take comments after she finishes presenting. So Alexis, all yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see the screen all right. As was mentioned, my name is Alexis Walker, and I am the Senior Clinical Research Coordinator with the ARCHES study, which is a part of the Neurology Department here at Washington University's Medical School campus. And I'm here today to talk about the ARCHES study. So first and foremost, just as a bit of a background on a little bit more information about who I am. So I have a bachelor's in neuroscience and African American studies from WashU. I received my bachelor's here, and my goal is to receive a PhD, potentially neuropsychology or somewhere along those lines to continue this path down research. So just a little more information about who we are and the team that's kind of behind the scenes here. So our two PIs, Dr. Ganesh Babalal and Dr. Daryl Hudson, are kind of at the forefront of the study as our principal investigators. They're the reason why I have a job and why we're here today. And then we're also have a team of great coordinators, myself, my coworkers, Terry, Dr. Ram, Dr. Samari, and Dr. Mario. So they all support in different capacities between office testing, helping with blood draws, and some of the other components, which I'll touch on in a bit here. But this is a wonderful team. I love working with all of them, and definitely allow us to get the work done. So why ARCHES, and what even is ARCHES? So ARCHES is pretty much a mouthful, but as we've kind of talked about prior to, what is emblematic and symbolic of St. Louis? What do you think of when you think of St. Louis? You think of the arch. And so ARCHES stands for Aging Research Characterizing Health Equity via Social Determinants. So pretty much a mouthful, but essentially you want to better understand how the environment impacts brain health, specifically within the African American community. So for those of you who don't know, those who identify as Black or African American are at twice the risk of developing some form of dementia compared to our white counterparts. And so a lot of this doesn't necessarily have to do or isn't inherent to different racial groups, but more so to do with the environment and what kind of goes on around each person. So that's where the social determinants of health comes into play. So some examples are faith and religious practices, whether or not you carry faith into all aspects of your life, if you practice a specific faith or religion, whether you have access to healthcare, access to good quality healthcare, neighborhood cohesion and safety. So whether or not you feel like you belong in your neighborhood and whether or not you feel safe and comfortable in your neighborhood, as well as chronic stressors. So what are things that happen day in, day out and are long-standing things that bring stress? So issues between relatives, between a parent and a child, between spouses, if you're having to take care of a relative who is sick or may need some additional support. So what are some of these factors that overall put an individual at greater risk for something like dementia and more specifically Alzheimer's? So as an overview, we aim to collaborate with community partners to recruit, enroll, and retain a cohort in order to examine the mechanisms behind risk of Alzheimer's disease among Black Americans, specifically in the St. Louis area. So essentially, why are we focusing on, like I said, the Black American community? Not only because we're at twice the risk of developing it, but also understanding that, as we all know, Black folks in the Black community is not a monolith. So not every person is the same. There's such a spectrum of experience that we want to understand what goes on within the larger Black community that might not only be putting us at greater risk for the disease, but also could potentially be protective factors against the disease. We aim to develop a cohort of middle to older age Black Americans, those who are 45 years or older in the St. Louis region over 4 years. And specifically, we want folks who have normal cognition, so no current signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, and are representative of a socioeconomic and spatially urban, suburban, and diverse range of St. Louis neighborhoods. So I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, if this is a study about dementia or Alzheimer's, why are you focusing on folks who are 45? A lot of that has to do with the fact that the changes that you see in your brain typically happen well before the symptoms start to show. So what are some of the things that people are consuming, both media-wise, food-wise, medication-wise, that might be putting them at a greater risk in that 20 years prior to the disease actually starting to show some symptoms or changes. So kind of taking the clock back a little bit to understand overall what's going on in that middle and then eventually older life course in order to put folks at greater risk for disease. In terms of our specific aim, so this is pulled from our grant, our first aim is to establish a cohort, as mentioned, of middle to older age Black adults, and use community-driven methods in modeling to understand environmental, sociocultural, and resource barriers associated to Alzheimer's disease or AD risk. Our goal was to hit 300 participants, and I'll talk a little bit about where our numbers are now. But a big reason why we wanted to do this study and a big reason why we wanted to use community-driven methods was, as I'm sure you all are familiar with, some of the things that have gone on within research and as well as the medical field overall that have built a sense of distrust as well as mistrust between not only the Black community in healthcare, but the Black community in research. So we want to ensure that we are making sustained long-term connections with community members so that they don't feel like we're just coming in, taking the information we need, and then leaving and not giving anything back to the community. So ensuring that we're constantly showing our faces, we're constantly interacting with not only the participants, but the community overall to ensure that they know that we're here for the long term and that this is a community-driven project that we want everyone to benefit from. The second aim is to determine the impact of depression, stress, and a novel theory-based SDOH, so social determinants of health, composite index on cognitive functioning in participants who are cognitively normal with and without preclinical Alzheimer's disease. So essentially just looking at some of the other factors on top of your environment. So whether or not you're depressed and if depression has an impact on your brain health and memory, which it proven in which it does have that impact. Stress, so going back to those chronic stressors, and then looking at some of the assessments that we provide or give people. I'm sure if you all participate in research, you're familiar with the ones that ask you to like draw a clock, or can you recall this set number of words? Can you count backwards from this starting number? So using the values from those tests to create a composite index to get a better idea of cognitive functioning and where people may be, let's say 10 years down the line. And then specific aim 3 is to test the associations between white matter hyperintensities, hippocampal volume, plasma biomarkers, and SDOH-CI, or the Social Determinants of Health Composite Index, in a subset of about 150 participants with MRI data. So long story short, just looking at some of these structural MRI scans and then seeing how some of these values, like the size of your hippocampus, the values that we get from folks where we collect their blood, as well as the values we get from their written assessments, and what that can tell us and how they're all associated all together. So with that, these are our 4 major study components. So 2 are required, 2 are optional. So the first one is an annual office testing session in which we have about 300 participants who come in once a year and sit with us for about an hour and a half to 2 hours and do a series of those pencil and paper tasks I mentioned, as well as a series of surveys to ask more questions about those social determinants of health, their environment, and their overall lived experience. Participants are compensated $75 for their time there. And this is just an opportunity. It's a one-on-one testing session. So it'd be someone like myself or another coworker sitting with a participant and going through these assessments with them, going through the surveys with them, and making sure that everything is completed as part of protocol. Next is a 2-time blood draw, so one during their first year of participation and one during their 3rd year of participation, in which we collect about 60 milliliters of blood in order to better understand certain proteins typically associated with Alzheimer's disease. And if the amount of that protein is elevated at year 3, if it's about the same at year 3, so we have a point of comparison. And so myself, along with another coworker of mine, received phlebotomy certification. So we are trained to not only do the office testing and neuropsychological assessments, but also to do the blood draw so that we do everything in-house and to maintain that level of camaraderie and rapport with participants because they just sat with us for about 2 hours for testing, and then we're the ones that complete the blood draw with them as well. There's also, as mentioned, an optional structural MRI scan. So participants are not injected with any sort of contrast. The only thing is that we ask that they don't come with any metal, implanted or otherwise, in order to do the MRI. And then if we find anything like, let's say, an old stroke, a new stroke, any growths or lesions, we connect them with our neuroradiologist in order to create any sort of follow-up if necessary. And the goal is to get about 150 or half of our sample to complete that. The scan itself is about 45 to 50 minutes. Typically, I'm the one that will meet them over at the hospital, walk them up, make sure they get changed, go through paperwork, get them in the scanner, and then they come out, and that's pretty much it. And they're paid $75 for their time there. Lastly, and I think this is probably my personal favorite part of the study, is the workshop portion. Now, this is using community-based system dynamics, which I believe is a method that was adopted from engineering. So essentially, like if I flip this switch, does this switch then come on? Then does this gear turn? And then does this thing happen? And then light happens. So essentially, how do we use that same logical or cyclical thinking and apply it to things like dementia risk? So if I, for example, eat better, does my overall health get better? And then therefore, does my risk of dementia go down? If my risk for dementia goes down, how does that affect other larger things in that system? Now, this requires a lot more of a time commitment for participants. This is an all-day affair. They spend about 8 hours with us in a series of discussions that are driven by the participants. So essentially, myself and the other members of our team are there as facilitators to ensure that the conversation moves and flows nicely. But essentially, it's driven by what the participants are interested in. So what do they think plays a role in dementia risk? What are the things that they've heard? What are the things that they've seen personally within their family? And what are the things that we as researchers may be focusing on that it's really not important to the larger community? So what are some things that they think need more investigation when it comes to dementia risk? Participants are paid for their time as well, and meals are provided. Now, as a note, also this workshop portion was funded by a subaward from the Alzheimer's Association, and that award actually expired at the end of last year, so we aren't currently doing any more of the workshops. But assuming we're able to get additional funding to continue it, we have tons of folks who are still interested in doing it, folks who want to do it again, and so that might be something we bring back in the future. Now, this is a general breakdown of where we are in terms of all of these components. So if we think back, our original goal was to have 300 participants enrolled. As of today, we're at 340. We wanted to go a little bit above because there were certain demographics and groups of folks that we didn't feel we had enough representation, specifically folks that were lower education, so folks with 12 years or fewer. Men, we needed a lot more men, and so we tried to do certain tactics in terms of recruitment in order to get those people. So for example, running ads on our local Metro bus and train stations on the bus shelters, inside the buses, inside the trains, to kind of get some folks that we may not be getting otherwise, going out into the community in places that we had not gone before. So going out, and I'm not sure if you all are familiar with some of the dynamics that come with being in St. Louis, but going out into East St. Louis and doing more recruitment there because we didn't have a lot of representation of folks that lived on the other side of the bridge. And then, as mentioned, getting more men. So where are some of the places we could get them? So making connections with the men that we do have and finding ways that we can integrate ourselves a little bit better. So we started going to barbershops and handing out flyers and talking to barbers there and figuring out when is a good time to catch some of these folks. We've gone to we were able to connect with some of the Metro bus drivers and then going out to the garages there, setting up shop and saying, hey, we have this study you might be interested in. Feel free to come on down. And then also because we are a study that's looking for folks who are 45 and up, a lot of these folks tend to still be working. And so being flexible and ensuring that we're able to get as many folks as possible. So that includes doing testing late afternoon, early evening, as well as on weekends, because not everybody has Monday through Friday during business hours available to come in for a couple hours to do testing. So ensuring that we can get as many people in as possible that represent the full spectrum of not only the Black community, but also the St. Louis community. With that, this study received funding initially in August of 2021. So we'll be entering our 5th year come this August. And so in terms of follow-up, there are certain participants we've seen for at this point, their 3rd going on their 4th appointment. So we've had 225 of our 340 complete their 1st follow-up. 56 have completed their 2nd, and I believe we have 3 on the calendar due for their 3rd follow-up, so their 4th appointment with us. Of our participants, 258 are female and 82 are male. So we're definitely hitting the ground running and trying to get some of those more men in. I believe my coworker and I both spoke to about 8 men today just to see if we could get them in the next couple weeks, so that we can beef up our numbers there and ensure that they're represented. In terms of our other components, our optional components, 116 have completed the MRI with more to come, and then 236, so over double what we intended, completed the workshop portion. And we completed that over 3 overall rounds, one in March of 2023, one of May in 2024, and one in October of 2024. Got a lot of great interest out of those and hoping to bring those back just out of personal interest, but I think overall people really enjoyed that portion. In terms of age, our youngest participant has to be 45, and our oldest at the time of baseline was 92. So we've got folks across the life experience spectrum. We have family pods, both parents and an adult child. We've got siblings, we've got cousins, we've got, tons of family representation. And with that, over the life course, different representation there. In terms of education, we were able to get quite a few more folks who are have high school or fewer years of education. I believe when we were looking at our recruitment efforts back in May of last year, our mean education was closer to about 16 years. So we're down to 14.9, with 8 years being the one end of the spectrum and 24 at the other. So we have a wide range of education there, and hoping to get more folks in, again, to learn more about the life course and overall experience of everyone. Now, here I've just posted some images of some of the practices or things that we try to put in place to ensure retention when it comes to participant enrollment and participation. So what we do is we release a newsletter every quarter out to our participants that provide updates on what we've been up to. Because as I mentioned, at this point, a lot of our participants, we only see them annually. And so to ensure that we still keep them involved and informed on what we've been up to, even if we don't see them physically, that there are still things that we can do to keep them updated. So as mentioned, we do our quarterly newsletter with updates about what's gone on over the last quarter, any papers we've published, where our enrollment numbers are, and if we're still looking for participants, and if so, who that might be. We've got fun brain games. I try to change it up every newsletter, more than just, Sudoku and word searches, stuff that folks might, decide to do while sitting at home and enjoying a nice cup of coffee, and pictures of what we've been up to, so recruitment efforts, as well as events that we've hosted. On the bottom, on the bottom left and the bottom right, are just photos from outreach and recruitment efforts we've done out in the community. So the one on the left is an event we've attended, I think, 3 years in a row. It's a Juneteenth health fair out in Bell Fountain, which is a neighborhood, a predominantly Black neighborhood here in St. Louis. So going out there and introducing ourselves and getting integrated with the community, letting them know that there's an opportunity to participate in research, get a little extra money if necessary, and then also just to learn and learn a little bit more about dementia. On the right is a photo of my coworker Mario at Centennial Church, which is a church here in St. Louis that was unfortunately affected gravely by the tornado that happened a couple weeks ago. But we are constantly out in the community, attending events, going places, putting the word out, getting more information, not only about dementia, but also about our study, just so that we're a more informed community overall. And then in the middle is a photo of our most recent annual participant brunch. We're actually having our third one, not this weekend, but the weekend following, in which we invite all participants. And this year we have the space so that they can bring a guest with them to come fellowship, learn a little bit more about the study. Last year and this year, we had and we will have a live band that play, instrumentations of songs that are relevant and important to the community. So folks have requested like soul and R&B and, Motown and things like that. So just a good opportunity for people to come together, meet other folks who are in the study. It's also a great way to recruit new people in the study through guests. They get to see and meet the coordinators. So if they've only met me, they get a chance to meet my coworkers. They haven't had a chance to meet our principal investigators. They get to meet them there. And then other panelists and individuals who come to speak. So last year we had a few neurologists one that has a focus on epilepsy, one that has a focus on multiple sclerosis, and being able to discuss with them about how dementia is impacted by some of these other diseases, and then thinking about neurology overall. What are some other things we might want to be aware of? It's also an opportunity for folks to ask us questions about, okay, so what have you all been up to over this last year? What are updates looking like? What can we expect in terms of papers, and then additional information that they may want to get from us at that time. And always free food is always a plus. So it's a great time overall. And like I said, we'll have our next one next Saturday. So we'll do this all again and be able to see all these wonderful faces once again. So these are just some of the things that we do as a part of recruitment as well as retention, because like I said, we want to ensure that we're having sustained and long-term connections with participants so that they know they not only are interested in continuing participation with us, but that if we're able to encourage them to participate in other research studies and other opportunities in which we can gain representation from the Black community, I'm all for it. So that is the end of my overview. This is my personal phone number as well, or not personal phone, my office number. It might as well be my personal number, but my office number. So feel free to call me if you have any questions, or you can feel free to email us at arches@wustl.edu. The WUSTL is just Washington University in St. Louis. Feel free to email or call. Happy to answer any questions now as well, or if you have questions you want to ask me later, feel free to call or email me. Go ahead and stop.
Alexis, that was so exciting. I have so many thoughts, but I will cede to we have a question in the chat that I think is a great one. And I'll just say it so everybody can hear it. Is the workshop component intended to be once in the 4 years? And how often is the optional MRI completed?
So the workshop component, we intend that each participant would be able to complete it once. We had it several times. I think the first round, we had 5 dates available. The second round, we had 11. And the third, we had 3. So plenty of opportunity for participants to come and participate. And that was another one that we focused specifically. We held them only on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays so that people could attend if they were able to. So because we got a lot of great reception from the workshops, we may decide to do it where people can come back and just continue the work we had already started, so that as opposed to starting from square one, we can start from, wherever they left off and keep going from there to get more detail. And then the MRI only happens once. So they come in one time for an MRI, and that's it for now.
Okay. And a follow-up question, maybe someone else is wondering this, to the MRI. I know you mentioned that you made referrals to other clinicians if something on the MRI appeared interesting, I'll just say. So does that mean people then get their MRI result? Do they have access to it? You understand what I'm asking?
Yes.
I hope.
So overall, we don't provide feedback or results to participants because this is a strictly observational study. It's
Okay.
really only if there's something that would impact their health immediately.
Gotcha.
The case in which we would provide those results back, and we
Okay.
get a read done by our neuroradiologist that's, kind of, if you want to call it, on call for those situations, and then gives us a good idea of what we then should report back to the participant and how they should proceed. I think we've only had one case in which it was immediate enough or urgent enough in which they needed to actively make follow-up with their
Yeah.
physician.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was things that people knew about, or it was something that you could look into, but it wouldn't be life-threatening or life-altering.
Okay. I think that's really, really nice. Feel free, folks, to unmute or to put in the chat, but if you're not going to, then my next question is, I would say I'm asking for a friend, but the friend is me. And I would like to know if, I know you're looking for people over 45, check. Is it really only St. Louis based, or, if someone could get to St. Louis, my friend, would that person be eligible to participate?
So we're looking for folks who live in the greater St. Louis area. So and the idea is we want folks where the closest major city is St. Louis. So if you live close to Kansas City, That
Yeah.
wouldn't work. If you live close to Chicago, that wouldn't work. Because we have folks who are as far west as Troy, Missouri.
Okay.
Um, that's not, it might as well be, to me, it feels like Kansas City, but
Yeah.
it's not that far
Gotcha.
relative to where St. Louis is. So we're looking for folks who live in the greater St. Louis area.
I figured that's what you were going to say, but it was worth a
Mhm.
shot anyway. And I'm
Yeah.
also wondering, because of that, do you think, and this might be more of a social work question than a neurology question, but do you think there's something about living in St. Louis that might emerge that's different from Kansas City? Like, for example, there's better barbecue in Kansas City. Yeah, I slid that in there. And so, therefore, that might decrease risk of dementia. This is not peer reviewed. I just made that up right now. But anyway,
Mm.
on a serious note, environmental factors matter. So,
Yes.
is that something you all take a look at as part of this or any other study?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the conversation came from in folks who have been to St. Louis or are familiar with St. Louis, I guess, history and background. Some of it has to do with the things that came from living in St. Louis in particular. There is a book that my boss lives and breathes by called The Broken Heart of America. I forget the name of the author, but it focuses on specifically the history of St. Louis. And it starts all the way back to the start of Missouri overall as a state, and then works its way up to St. Louis about 10 years ago. And how there are specific things about St. Louis that you don't are unique and you don't necessarily get in other places. So one of the big ones is the Delmar Divide. So a street that runs east to west in St. Louis, where north of this specific street, the life expectancy jumps, or it dives, I should say,
Mhm.
north of it about 20 years. And so thinking about how something as simple as just, turning your head left to right, you can see
Mm.
such a significant change in terms of just something as simple, if you could call it that, life expectancy. And then some of the history of St. Louis in terms of there was a hospital that closed in 1979, Homer G. Phillips, that only served or to particularly worked with African American and Black patients. It closed down. And so the changes that come with having a hospital that was for you at the time and then no longer was open, what then happens to access to healthcare? So certain things about St. Louis, certain things about the lived experience of being in St. Louis that even though Kansas City, is a part of Missouri, we love y'all, it's a little different. And then even down to the East St. Louis versus St. Louis, Missouri. Divide is not necessarily what I want to call it, but the dynamic between what changes when you go over that bridge, go over the river. So St.
Wow,
Louis
thank
is what we're
you.
focusing on right now.
You've convinced me. It sounds like the KU ADRC needs to step up. Just saying, in case any of my colleagues are on here. Which reminds me, I have to make a confession to you, Alexis, and all the St. Louis people. The folks who were with us on the webinar last week might remember that I said that I invited you all to see if you were as good as we are over here in Kansas. And I suppose that the verdict is yes, of course. Sounds like you're doing great work there, or here in St. Louis. So thank you for that. I have one more question, and that is, I've learned during my time at the ADRC that each ADRC kind of has its own focus, maybe is the word I'm looking for. And so in Kansas, our focus is metabolism and mitochondria. And so we have lots of work on lifestyle, exercise, diet, working toward the cure for Alzheimer's. So I wonder if you would tell us kind of what your focus is here in St. Louis.
I'm gonna let Andre and Murtis
Okay.
handle that one. Yeah.
All right.
Hi, everyone. And I think Eldine has had his hand up too, but
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
will
I
say,
think of him too.
we focus on a lot of things, but one thing that's been a very long time interest of our director, John Morris, and our colleagues is preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And through work here in many other centers, and for our biomarker studies, which Murtis and I recruit for the Memory and Aging Project, we do, have not only the clinical and cognitive assessment, we, whenever we can, collect the spinal fluid and the PET scans and MRIs. And now, because of work done here in other places, the blood tests are getting to be right as good as the spinal fluid. So we've been very interested in when people convert from normal, healthy brain aging into the disease state. So while many centers do that now, I think we've had a very, very long time focus on that. And Martis, you might want to add something else.
Me? I
Oh,
was going to say, are you there now? Are we here? Are we on?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I would like to say a couple of things about being someone who tests. I've done it for 8 years. And I noticed in your numbers, you had trouble getting males. And you know why that is? Because the first time I took the test, I actually asked the tester, I was so upset. I asked if she was going to take my car keys because we tend to be always correct as males. And it was really a stressor when I took that first test and I didn't get done till I had them all wrong. And so there's some way in that in your recruiting, I like that you would impart to the people who take the test that it's really not that it's a much harder test than an average people would take, and not to be discouraged by it, that they are really helping someone else. And then the other thing is and I don't know whether maybe it's not ready for this question yet. I'm in an area that's primarily all white, but we don't have native people who are black. But because of different things in society, we're having more. In an early testing, are there any indications of the difference between race on the early detection? One of the things that I think is that we've always emphasized memory, but it looks to me like that cognitive impairments might come up before memory will manifest itself. Is there a difference in races yet that you can identify?
So I'm not entirely sure in terms of early detection and in identifying those changes, if there's a difference in races, but there has been a difference in terms of when people decide to get follow-up. So typically, folks who are Black, by the time they get the help they need, it's a little too late. Not too,
Right.
it's never too late to get help, but it's once the disease has progressed so far that the symptoms have taken over. You need around the clock care, you need to no longer drive, things of that nature. Whereas, and I think part of that has to do with the structure we have with healthcare. That if you don't have access to a good physician or someone that would be able to guide you through the process of, okay, I'm starting to notice changes in my memory, my thinking. I'm having more incidents where I can't quite stop my car fast enough, or I'm forgetting where I am. That once you get so far that it's like, okay, well, now it's a glaring issue. Other people notice it. Now I'll get help. In terms of that early detection piece, I'm not necessarily sure if there's, or I'm not aware of off the top of my head, research on differences between races in terms of early detection.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Wow, great questions. Thank you so much. We are unsurprisingly past our sort of official cutoff time. So I will wrap us up by thanking you again, Alexis, for an excellent presentation, even though you basically told me I cannot participate in the project. It was still great. Thank you. But I hope anybody out there who is eligible to participate will strongly consider, and we will be happy to help spread the word for more folks in St. Louis to be research participants, not only for ARCHES, but I'm sure you have lots of other great studies happening, just as we do at KU. So last call for any questions or comments. Thank you so much, everybody. Next week, our speaker is a social worker, because of course it is. And she is going to talk with us about what are social workers good for anyway? Why should you use one, especially in the context of a dementia diagnosis or your own aging journey? And so she will be with us next Thursday, the 12th of June. I do also want to mention, Alexis mentioned that some of your outreach is about Juneteenth. So now that we are in June, Juneteenth is on our calendar, and the ADRC will be closed on June 19th, which, to my chagrin, is a Thursday. So we won't have a webinar on June 19th. I'll miss seeing you all on the 19th, but I hope everybody has a great day. We'll remind you about that more in the newsletter. So we'll wrap up for today. Thank you so much, our friends in St. Louis. Look forward to connecting with you more, inviting you back to share more stuff, more good stuff, and you can be on the list of the best ADRCs alongside KU. All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great week. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.